Hello again. You're halfway through the course, and we're getting ready to start on Module 3, which consists of the lessons 8, 9, and 10. And I want to just very briefly again review with you what you will cover in these lessons. Lesson 8, just some basic routine information on how modern journalists function as fact gatherers. Journalists are very effective fact gatherers, but you're competing with a couple of other professions. Police are very effective fact gatherers, but police have a lot of benefits that you don't have, like a gun, which they wear, a badge, which implicates that they have the full force and effect of law behind them. Journalists don't have those benefits. Lawyers are very effective fact gatherers, but lawyers have a whole collection of court rules that allow them to discover evidence. They can take depositions, they can take interrogatories, they can request admissions. These are all part of the civil rules which control court practice in all of our jurisdictions. So, as a professional journalist, you obviously need to know what tools you have that can help you be effective fact gatherers, and that's what lesson 8 is all about. You're going to study the open meetings laws that exist in most, if not all, jurisdictions. You're going to study the open records laws that exist in all, if not most, if not all, jurisdictions. And we're going to spend some time studying FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, which is the federal act, which applies, interestingly enough, not to Congress, because Congress passed that law, and it does not apply to the federal court system. It applies to the countless federal administrative agencies under the executive branch of government. But it certainly provides a fantastic source of information for fact gatherers. So that's what lesson 8 is going to cover, how you as a fact gatherer can acquire information that you need in order to write accurate stories. Moving on to lesson 9, I have always said when I teach this class in the classroom that I am, and my students, although they're mostly just students who are just entering the profession, don't frequently seem to don't seem to frequently have the need to rely on a confidential source in order to write a news story. But if and when you are ever faced with garnering information from someone who says, I'll provide it to you, but you have to promise me that I will remain anonymous, then you may be faced with a difficult situation. You can even get yourself into a catch-22. Perhaps you have access to some information provided to you by a confidential source to whom you have promised anonymity. You write the story, and maybe there's some criminal misconduct involved, either directly or indirectly, and the police or the court, someone wants to know where you got that information, because it's very important to those folks to know that information in order for them to be able to do their job. So they call you into court and they say, where'd you get the information? And you say, sorry, I promised anonymity to the person. They're a confidential source and I can't divulge that information. In which case the judge says to you, after a long, I'm very much abbreviating this process, but you are in a real catch-22, because ultimately the judge is going to say to you, either give us the information or I'll find you in contempt of court, which means jail. And you go to jail until you decide you're going to tell us. So, there you are. In order to stay out of jail, you have to breach your promise to your confidential source and divulge who that person is, which has some horrible consequences. Namely, you probably will never be able to have another confidential source believe in you enough to give you the information that you need. And, as you will learn in reading your text, just starting in about the 1980s, we now have an area of law called promissory estoppel, in which that person to whom you promised anonymity may be able to sue you for breach of your promise, particularly if they suffer an economic damage as a result of your breach, like they lose their job when their boss finds out that they've been handing out information. So it's just a situation that probably the best rule you can abide by is not get yourself into a situation where you need to rely on promising confidentiality to someone. But in the event you do, that's what Lesson 9 is all about. It's a full chapter that discusses the kinds of jams you can get yourself into, what your rights are, and how hopefully you'll be able to survive. And last in Module 3 is Lesson 10. You know, we all like to watch the various crime shows that are on television, and I think some of them, the dramas may get carried a little beyond what happens in reality, but the underlying theme in most of these crime shows is that our Constitution provides numerous very strongly enforced rights that protect people who are charged with crime. You all know about the Fifth Amendment. He's taking the Fifth. He can't be forced to testify against himself. You all know about the speedy trial rule. In Alaska, if you're charged with crime, you have to be brought to trial within 120 days, 4 months, or else you go free. There are just all kinds of constitutional guarantees that protect your rights as a criminal defendant. Among the most important is your right under the Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution to a speedy and fair trial by a jury of your peers and all of that. On the other hand, the First Amendment, freedom of the press, gives the public at large the right to access to information that the public maybe has a right to know. So you've got First Amendment freedom of the press clashing with Sixth Amendment right of a criminal defendant to a fair trial. Why is there a clash? There's a potential clash because a crime is committed and the news media reports the crime, and there are certain ways that are discussed in detail in your text in which the report given by the news media can adversely affect the right to the criminal defendant to a fair trial. Report that the defendant has confessed. Report that the defendant, the alleged person who's allegedly committed the crime, has flunked a lie detector test. When I was growing up, journalists in those kinds of criminal cases used to interview people on the street, come up and say, well, you know, you've heard about such and such a horrible crime. What do you think should happen to that person? And of course, you know, hang him, whatever. There are lots of ways in reporting, as you're entitled to under First Amendment freedom of the press, on crime situations that you can adversely impact the right to a fair trial of the person charged with crime. Because by the time the people come in to be selected as jurors, they already know. They already know all about crime. They know what happened. They've already made up their mind as to whether the person is guilty or not guilty. If that's the case, then we may have a problem as far as Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial. So once again, Lesson 10 sounds like a short and simple subject, and that is not a particularly long discussion, but it's a very interesting discussion and something that modern news gatherers need to be aware of, how far they can go in reporting crime stories without crossing the line and adversely affecting the Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial of the person charged with crime. Okay, that takes care of your introduction to Module 3. I'll be back when you get ready to start Module 4. Talk to you soon.